King, a beautiful yet kind of a cheap-looking film that was meh. The King stars Timothee Chalamet, Joel Edgerton, Robert Pattinson, and is written by the director David Michoud and Joel Edgerton as well. The film it's very beautiful in terms of how it's shot, the cinematography, a lot of natural light, a lot of beautiful landscapes, a lot of scenes where it looks dirty, grimy. You can almost sense what the people are going through as they're walking. You can, almost like you can smell the dirt, the just must of these people. But there is kind of a counter to that because it does look a little bit cheap in some of the elements of this. Looks like some of the costume design wasn't quite up to scratch. Some of the armor that they're wearing looks, it almost looks like it's in place, but it does look it's a little bit different. It doesn't look as realistic as some of the other films out regarding this kind of time frame or time period. Like I said, the armor, it looks a little cheap, the way it kind of rattles and kind of shakes. It doesn't look like it was very well put together in that aspect in terms of the costume design. At one point when Chalamet's sitting on the throne, he's got the red velvet with the white fur around, and it just doesn't look very good, especially when you look at other films such as The Favorite and Mary Queen of Scots, Elizabeth, all these notable period pieces involving the British monarchies, and it really just doesn't match that standard that they set. Even if you look at the TV show on Showtime, The Tudors, I understand that we're talking about comparing to The Tudors, we're 100 years difference, give or take, but it just it just kind of takes you out of it because some of the costumes are bad. They don't really look that good. And that's really kind of my biggest complaint against it because it is so beautifully shot that when you see some instances of them wearing like cheaper material, you're kind of like, okay, see what you spent your budget on was giving the cinematographer, who does an excellent job, the amount of time he needed to go out and shoot these scenes in natural light, golden hour, sunset, sunrises, things like that. And also, there are a couple scenes where they do have quite a number of extras together, just rolling around fighting in the mud, and it looks exquisite because they're dirty. They're dirty and they're fighting. You don't see people just standing there like boom, 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 hitting with a sword. They're fighting in mud, so they're slipping and falling. They're swinging their sword. They're missing. There's war hammers, which is a good plus, and some crossbows, some longbows, things like that. And that looks good, but again, my biggest complaint comes back to some of the costumes that they wear. Some of the scenes are kind of like, not really that good looking. Looks like you could have put a little bit more time into that, but that's just nitpicking. Let's move on. My only other big major complaint is, and Robert Pattinson's playing of the French Dauphin, or the heir to the French throne, and his accent was all over the place. The rolling of the R's, the R, like kind of never really stuck with one way of pronouncing things, and it does kind of play on you. You're listening to him, and you actually have several people speaking French in the film, and you hear them and their accents, and then you have Robert Pattinson, who's mostly speaking English, but with a very heavy French accent, and it almost seems like it's one of those parody French accents, and you're just kind of like, come on, please give me a little bit more, Rob. You've gone a long way from your Twilight films. You had The Lighthouse, couple good films. Could you give me a little bit better accent? But it does take a little bit of license with some of the depictions here in terms of how some of the characters interact and end up how they play out. It is obviously kind of based on the William Shakespeare Henry IV plays, and it's good. Beautiful film, about 2 hours and 20 minutes of it, but it does drag on a little bit. Like I said, the accent is one of the things that you're just like, God, please stop, Rob. But his ending in the film is quite entertaining once it hits, and you're kind of like, thank you, God. As for Chalamet, he does a good job. Joel Edgerton does a good job. He's kind of the moral compass of the film in a way. I would have liked for him to be a little bit more involved in some of it. as it seemed like there were other players that were trying to take his place once Hal becomes king. And you can kind of see that they just didn't have very good roles written for them, and they were kind of just sticking around. But so the film focuses on Henry's movement into France as he's going to try to conquer. It ends up leading to the Battle of Agincourt, where the smaller English army has a resounding victory over the significantly larger French army that is in the film led by the Dauphin, or Robert Pattinson in this case. So there is some back and forth that does start it to see how this war starts. There's some insults thrown from both sides. Apparently, Pattinson sends a little ball to Hal to get it kicked off, showing that he's still a child after he's pronounced king. And then an assassin is supposedly sent to try to kill Hal. And then Hal then declares war on France, heading over across the English Channel to try to take back his rightful ancestral home, because he is descended from the French royalty from a few hundred years before. At this point, it does get a little bit complicated because you do have a variety of players in the English court that seems to be just backstabbing each other, positioning and moving, trying to gain power, because Hal is kind of an unknown entity in the way that they played it, because it does start the film off with his younger brother being supposedly the one who is going to get the crown, and then he ends up dying in battle, and Hal is forced to take the crown from his dying father's bedside. Chalamet does good. It's just some of the dirty politics that's going on behind the scenes could have helped to be a little bit more fleshed out, because they just seem kind of not necessarily believable, but just kind of added in there to kind of spice it up a little bit, more so than to provide a solid plot points or add to the narrative of the film. It is a film I would recommend watching if you do have 2 hours and 20 minutes to watch. It's on Netflix, so it's readily available for that. Hell, I think it's like $17, $18 a month now. They seem to keep going up. Hopefully they can continue to match, putting out at least decent features like The King, and some surprisingly good features like Dolomite. But I do feel that it could have been a little bit better in terms of fleshing out some of the narrative, kind of speeding it up a little bit. You could probably cut 20, 25 minutes out of this film and it would be a little bit better, because it would speed up some of the things and remove some of that nastiness behind scenes in the English court. Because at the end of the film, it's kind of brought back up in a way that everything was started from these backstabbers trying to gain power from Hal, or trying to position themselves into power. He does kind of get the last laugh when one of these guys at the end of the film gets stabbed for really just betraying him from the beginning. But it almost seems a little bit unearned, because they put so much of that in there but didn't really expand upon it or explain it or give it clear through lines. It just seemed like an afterthought where they're like, oh, well, he lost this one good guy, so now we need to kind of get back at him and get rid of this bad guy that we know is here. And like I said, some of it didn't really work that much for me, but it was all right. And the film is good. But again, if you got some time, watch this film. It is a good one. It is worth the time. And it is very, very beautiful to look at. Thank you.